Good morning, everyone. This is Aaron Wright, teaching pastor at St. James Church in Colorado Springs. I am coming at you from my stomping grounds of Montgomery, Alabama, and I am really missing it out there because it is hot as blazes and humid. So I look forward to doing this teaching and then going and jumping in a lake, any lake, a pool, anyone's pool, a swamp, I don't care. This morning's passage is Mark chapter 15, beginning in verse 6. It says, Now, it was the governor's custom each year during the Passover celebration to release one prisoner, anyone the people requested. One of the prisoners at that time was Barabbas, a revolutionary who had committed murder in an uprising. Okay, so we've got Barabbas, who was a revolutionary, and he's committing murder during an insurgence, during an uprising. The crowd went to Pilate and asked him to release a prisoner as usual. Verse 9, would you like me to release to you the king of the Jews? Pilate asked, for he realized by now that the leading priests had arrested Jesus out of envy. But at this point, the leading priests stirred up the crowd and demanded the release of Barabbas instead of Jesus. Barabbas, the thief, the murderer, the insurrectionist, is the one they want released. Pilate asked them, then what should I do with this man you call king of the Jews? They shouted back, crucify him. Why? Pilate demanded. What crime has he committed? But the mob roared even louder, crucify him. So, to pacify the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. The soldiers took Jesus into the courtyard of the governor's headquarters and called out the entire regiment. They dressed him in a purple robe, and they wove thorn branches into a crown and put it on his head. Then they saluted him and taunted, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him on the head with a reed stick, spit on him, and dropped to their knees in mock worship. When they were finally tired of mocking him, when they were finally exhausted from mocking him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him again. Then they led him away to be crucified. A passerby named Simon, who was from Cyrene, was coming up from the countryside just then, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus, and they brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. They offered him wine and myrrh, but he refused it. Then the soldiers nailed him to the cross. They divided his clothes and threw dice to decide who would get each piece. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. A sign announced the charge against him. It read, the King of the Jews. 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. Ha, look at you now, they yelled at him. You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well then, save yourself and come down from the cross. The leading priests and teachers of the religious law also mocked Jesus. He saved others, they scoffed, but he can't save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross so we can see it and believe him. Even the men who are crucified with Jesus ridiculed him. Yeah, so when I was younger, I used to think in terms of when I would do a message, I used to think in terms of what is the takeaway? What can I get from this? What can I give to the people through this message? And I still think like that, and I think that's a good thought to think because we don't want to waste people's time. But when I look at the crucifixion, the idea of thinking in terms of what can I get out of this, what can I take away from this, is so flippant, and it almost sounds blasphemous. The irony or the paradox here, though, however, is that we actually do take something away from the crucifixion, but we never take anything away from the crucifixion without first totally abandoning ourselves over to it, without totally giving ourselves to it first. And the interesting part of doing that, the interesting part of giving ourselves over to the resurrection, of abandoning ourselves to the resurrection, and thinking in terms of what can I also get from the resurrection, is when I abandon myself to the crucifixion, when I give myself to the crucifixion, what I actually want to take away from the crucifixion begins to change. Simon was forced to carry Jesus' cross for him, and Jesus invites us to pick up our cross and carry it for him. When we pick up our cross and begin to carry our cross for Jesus, what we want begins to change, because the call to pick up and carry our cross means nothing less than death, means nothing less than being willing to sacrifice and give of ourselves to the betterment of other people. In the back corner of the sanctuary, or this living room at St. James Church, sits a little dusty old communion table that myself and Alex and Dave put together several years ago. The interesting thing about this communion table is we made this communion table from discarded wood, from discarded old furniture. I don't know what that wood used to be. I don't know if it used to be furniture. Don't know if it used to be a bar top. Don't know if it used to be a piece of a house. But the point is that this wood had been discarded, and we took that wood and we fashioned it, we repurposed it, and we remade it for something other than common use. We repurposed it, we refashioned it, we reformed it for sacred uses and sacred purposes. And I think that's what Jesus invites us to do, and it's what Simon's example invites us to do, is to pick up our cross and follow him, be remade, be repurposed, not look at the gospel, not look at Christ for what I can get out of Christ, even though the benefits are eternally wonderful, but to look at the gospel, to look at Christ, to look at the crucifixion, to look at the resurrection, and realize that I don't get anything unless I first totally abandon myself into that. And it's in that sense that God reshapes and repurposes us and remakes us. If we look at Barabbas, he was on death row for being an insurrectionist, for being a thief, and being a murderer. And the insurrectionist, the thief, the murderer, was released. And Jesus instead, who came to lead an insurrection not against Rome, but against the powers of darkness. And Jesus, who didn't come to steal, but to give life. And Jesus, who came not to murder, but to give life. He was swapped for it. He was swapped for that. And the interesting thing is that in Jesus' death and in Jesus' resurrection, when Jesus' life was stolen from him, when Jesus' life was taken from him, Jesus was then in the place to be able to give us life and to be able to give us resurrection, to be able to give us freedom. The end of the story ends with a Roman guard standing next to the dead Jesus on the cross. And the Roman guard looks at Jesus, and by way of echoing Isaiah, when Isaiah says, "Then shall the eyes of the blind be open," this Roman guard looks up at Jesus and says, "Surely, truly, this is the Son of God." Jesus invites us to abandon ourselves into the crucifixion, because it's only by abandoning ourselves to the crucifixion that we can discover true life. And it's only by abandoning ourselves to the crucifixion that we can experience resurrection. So God's grace be with you. I land back in Colorado Springs on Tuesday, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. Grace and peace.